My sister humiliated her husband at their housewarming party, so he dropped a bombshell that destroyed their marriage. I need to tell you about my sister Jessica because God help me, I love her. But she's been absolutely awful to her husband for years, and I feel so guilty for not saying anything sooner. Jessica is 35, and she's this super successful marketing executive who makes ridiculous money and has always been obsessed with having this perfect life. You know, like everything has to look flawless from the outside. The right house, the right car, the right husband, the right everything. She's one of those people who posts these gorgeous Instagram photos of her breakfast and somehow makes scrambled eggs look like they belong in a magazine. But here's the thing, and this is where I feel like such a terrible brother for staying quiet. She's been emotionally destroying her husband Tom for years. Tom's this sweet, quiet guy who's an architect. He's 36, and honestly, he's probably one of the kindest people I've ever met. When they first got together like 8 years ago, he was this happy, funny guy who would crack jokes and actually seemed to really love my sister. But over the years, especially after they started trying to have kids, I watched him just fade. That's the only way I can describe it. See, they tried to get pregnant for like 3 years, and when they finally went to all these specialists, they found out that Tom has some kind of fertility issue. I don't know all the medical details because that's private, obviously. But basically he can't have kids the normal way. And instead of Jessica treating this like something they were dealing with together as a couple, she made it all about how he was failing her. I started noticing it at family dinners first. She'd make these little comments that sounded like jokes, but were actually just cruel. Like if someone mentioned having kids, she'd laugh and say something like, "Well, some of us aren't working with full equipment if you know what I mean," while looking right at Tom. Or she'd joke about how she should have tested the merchandise before buying. The poor guy would just sit there and take it getting quieter and quieter each time. And I said nothing. God, I hate myself for that. I mean, what was I supposed to do? It's their marriage, right? But I could see Tom shrinking into himself more and more. He stopped making eye contact, stopped contributing to conversations, and when he did talk, it was like he was apologizing for existing. The worst part was watching Jessica treat this whole infertility thing like it was some personal embarrassment Tom was putting her through. She'd complain to me and our parents about how unfair it was that she had to deal with this like Tom had fertility problems just to spite her. She'd say things like, "I never signed up for this, and I should have known something was wrong with him." Just absolutely heartless stuff. Eventually they decided to try surrogacy as their last option. Jessica presented it like she was being so generous and understanding, but I could tell she saw it as this final chance to get the baby she needed to complete her perfect life picture. For Tom, I think it felt like one more confirmation that he was inadequate. The whole process seemed to make him even more miserable. They found this surrogate named Maria. I only met her a couple times, but she seemed really sweet and down to earth. She's in her early 30s, and she was just this warm, normal person who was helping them, because she genuinely wanted to help people have families. Jessica, of course, treated the whole thing like a business transaction. I remember her telling me how she made sure to keep appropriate boundaries with Maria because she didn't want things getting too personal. Looking back now, I wonder if that was the beginning of everything falling apart. Because while Jessica was treating Maria like an employee, Tom was probably just grateful to finally have someone in this whole situation who wasn't making him feel like garbage about himself. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. I should have said something earlier. I should have told Jessica she was being cruel. I should have checked on Tom more. But I didn't, and maybe if I had, none of what happened next would have happened. Or maybe it would have happened anyway, and Tom would have finally gotten away from my sister's toxicity sooner. I don't know. All I know is that what happened at their housewarming party changed everything. So fast forward to about 3 months ago. Jessica and Tom had just moved into this absolutely massive house. I'm talking like a $800,000 house in the nicest part of town. Jessica was over the moon about it because of course it was another piece of her perfect life puzzle. She immediately started planning this huge housewarming party because she needed everyone to see how successful and happy she was. I should have known something was going to go wrong. Jessica gets this manic energy when she's planning events like she's directing a movie about her own life. She spent weeks obsessing over every detail, the catering, the flowers, the lighting, everything. She kept talking about how this party was going to be absolutely perfect, and how everyone would be so impressed. The night of the party, their house was packed with probably 50 people. All of Jessica's work colleagues, some old college friends, neighbors, family. It was exactly the kind of crowd Jessica loves, successful people who would validate her choices and admire her lifestyle. Tom was there, obviously, but he was doing that thing he always does now where he just kind of hovers around the edges of conversations, not really participating. I felt so bad watching him that night. He was wearing this nice button-down shirt that was clearly new, probably bought specifically for the party, but he looked absolutely miserable. You could see it in his shoulders, the way he carried himself. He'd smile politely when people talked to him, but his eyes were just empty. I kept thinking I should go talk to him, but honestly I didn't know what to say. Jessica, on the other hand, was in her element. She was wearing this gorgeous black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and she was practically glowing as she moved through the crowd, making sure everyone saw how perfect everything was. She kept pointing out features of the house, talking about their future plans, just basking in all the attention. Then came the toast. Oh God, the toast. I still get sick thinking about it. Jessica had been drinking champagne all night. Not drunk, but definitely tipsy enough to lose whatever filter she normally had. She grabbed a champagne flute and started tapping it with a knife to get everyone's attention. The whole room went quiet, and she got this huge smile on her face. "I just want to thank everyone for coming to our perfect new home," she started, and I could already feel my stomach dropping because I knew that tone. That's her, "I'm about to say something I think is clever but is actually horrible" tone. She went on about how happy they were, how this house represented everything they'd worked for, and then she transitions to talking about Maria and the surrogacy. "And soon we'll have our perfect baby to complete our perfect family," she said, raising her glass. But then she kept going. "And this is where everything went to hell. Thank God for modern science," she said with this laugh, "since we couldn't rely on the old-fashioned method." She paused for effect, and I could see Tom's face just crumbling. But she wasn't done. She looked directly at him with this smirk and added, "Don't worry, honey, we'll just tell everyone the baby looks like you." The room went completely silent. Not the good kind of silent, the awful, uncomfortable kind where everyone suddenly becomes very interested in their shoes. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab Jessica and shake her and ask her what the hell was wrong with her. But then Tom stood up. I'd never seen him move that deliberately before. Usually he's all hesitant and apologetic, but not this time. He was calm, almost eerily calm, and when he spoke his voice was clear and steady. "You're right, Jessica," he said. "Our marriage is over." And then he just unleashed everything. He told the entire room about Maria, about how they'd fallen in love, about how she was pregnant with his biological child, and how he was leaving Jessica to be with her and start a real family built on love, instead of whatever twisted performance their marriage had become. Jessica literally screamed. Not yelled, screamed. She called him a liar, threw her champagne glass against the wall, and had what I can only describe as a complete public meltdown. People started grabbing their coats and basically running for the exits. It was absolutely devastating to watch, but honestly, part of me was proud of Tom for finally fighting back. If I thought Jessica's public meltdown was bad, what came next was absolutely insane. I mean, I knew my sister could be vindictive when she didn't get her way, but this was a whole new level of crazy that honestly scared me. The morning after the party, she called me at like 6 a.m. sobbing hysterically. I thought maybe she was finally going to take some responsibility for what happened, maybe apologize for how she'd treated Tom all these years. But no. Instead, she launched into this completely delusional rant about how Tom and Maria had conspired against her and stolen her life. She kept saying things like, "That manipulative woman seduced my husband, and Tom's too weak to think for himself." I tried to point out that maybe her cruel behavior had pushed Tom away, but she completely lost it on me. She screamed that I was supposed to be her brother and support her, not take sides with people who betrayed her. That's when I realized she genuinely believed she was the victim in all this. Within a week, Jessica had hired this aggressive lawyer and filed a massive lawsuit against both Tom and Maria. She was claiming breach of the surrogacy contract, emotional distress, conspiracy to defraud, basically throwing every legal term she could think of at them. Her lawyer fees alone had to be costing her a fortune, but she was absolutely determined to destroy them both. But the worst part was her social media campaign. Jessica started systematically contacting everyone we knew, family, friends, her work colleagues, even people from high school, spinning this story about how the unstable surrogate had seduced her innocent husband to steal her perfect life. She'd call crying, talking about how betrayed and devastated she was, painting herself as this wronged wife who'd trusted the wrong people. She even started posting these cryptic Facebook statuses about learning who your real friends are, and people showing their true colors. It was so manipulative and gross. She was trying to control the narrative before Tom or Maria could tell their side of the story. The crazy thing is, some people actually bought it at first. A few of her work friends were commenting with supportive messages, and I saw some relatives sharing her posts. It made me sick because I knew the truth about how she'd been treating Tom, but she was such a good performer that she almost had me questioning what I'd witnessed with my own eyes. She even tried to get our parents to choose sides, calling them constantly with these dramatic speeches about family loyalty, and how everyone was abandoning her in her time of need. When they didn't immediately jump on her bandwagon, she accused them of loving Tom more than their own daughter. It was exhausting to watch. I started realizing that Jessica wasn't just hurt or angry. She was completely detached from reality. In her mind, she'd done nothing wrong, and everyone else was just failing to support her properly. She couldn't accept that her own cruelty had consequences. It was like watching someone have a complete psychological break, and honestly, it was terrifying to see what my sister was capable of when she felt cornered. Update 1. So about 2 months after Jessica filed her lawsuit, I got a call from Tom's lawyer. I guess Tom had told him I might be willing to testify about Jessica's behavior over the years, which honestly I was. I mean, somebody needed to tell the truth about what she'd been putting him through. But here's the thing. They barely needed my testimony because Jessica basically destroyed her own case. I'm not kidding. Her lawyer had to subpoena her phone records and emails as part of the discovery process, and what they found was absolutely damning. We're talking about years of text messages to her friends where she called Tom defective, broken, half a man, and so much worse. I saw some of the screenshots Tom's lawyer showed me, and I literally felt sick reading them. There were messages where she complained about being stuck with him and how embarrassed she was about his fertility issues. She'd written things like, "I can't believe I have to deal with this for the rest of my life," and "Why couldn't I have married someone normal?" The worst part was reading her conversations with her work friends where she'd go into graphic detail about how much she resented Tom and how she felt cheated by life for ending up with him. There was this one message thread where she was talking about how she deserved better and how she was basically just waiting for the surrogacy to work so she could at least get something good out of their marriage. I mean, can you imagine? This woman had spent years systematically destroying her husband's self-worth, documenting it all in writing, and then had the audacity to claim emotional distress when he finally escaped. It was like she'd created a perfect record of her own abuse. Her lawyer took one look at all this evidence and basically told her she was screwed. There's no way you can claim someone emotionally damaged you when you have years of proof that you were the one doing the emotional damage. The conspiracy and fraud charges were equally ridiculous because Tom and Maria's relationship had developed naturally. It wasn't some elaborate scheme to steal Jessica's life. But Jessica still wouldn't back down. Even when her own lawyer was telling her this case was unwinnable and would only result in public humiliation, she insisted on pushing forward. She was convinced that if she could just get in front of a judge, she could make them understand how wronged she'd been. The judge threw out her case in like 15 minutes. I wasn't there, but Tom told me later that Jessica had shown up in this expensive suit, probably thinking she could charm her way through it, but the judge barely let her speak. He said the evidence clearly showed a pattern of emotional abuse from Jessica toward Tom, and that her claims of emotional distress were not only unfounded, but offensive given the circumstances. Jessica had to pay not only her own legal fees, which were already astronomical because she'd hired this high-end lawyer, but also a portion of Tom and Maria's legal costs. We're talking about tens of thousands of dollars down the drain. When I heard about the ruling, I felt this weird mix of relief and sadness. Relief because finally someone in authority had seen through Jessica's lies and validated what Tom had been going through. But also sad because this was my sister, and watching her self-destruct like this was honestly heartbreaking. She called me that night absolutely hysterical, ranting about how the legal system was biased against women and how everyone was conspiring to protect Tom and Maria. She couldn't understand why her own evidence had been used against her. It was like she genuinely didn't see anything wrong with the horrible things she'd said about Tom over the years. That's when I realized Jessica wasn't just mean or selfish. There was something fundamentally broken in her ability to see herself clearly. Update 2. You know what's crazy? Even after the lawsuit completely fell apart, Jessica still thought she could control how people saw the situation. But once word got out about what was actually in those text messages, her whole carefully constructed victim narrative started crumbling fast. The surrogacy agency got involved because they were legally required to protect their reputation when one of their cases became this public. They issued a statement to the court defending Maria's character and professional history. Apparently, Maria had been a surrogate twice before with zero issues, and both families had nothing but glowing things to say about her. The agency made it clear that they'd thoroughly vetted Maria, and that she was exactly the kind of person they trusted with their clients. That statement basically destroyed Jessica's claims that Maria was some kind of manipulative predator who seduced innocent husbands. It became pretty obvious that if anyone was the problem in this situation, it wasn't Maria. But what really killed Jessica's social media campaign was when people started finding out about the text evidence. I don't know exactly how word spread. Maybe through the legal proceedings, or maybe Tom finally started telling people his side of the story. But suddenly everyone knew about those horrible messages Jessica had been sending about Tom for years. Her work friends, the ones who'd been posting supportive comments on her Facebook posts, started going silent. A few of them even deleted their previous comments. I guess it's one thing to support a friend who you think got betrayed, but it's another thing entirely to support someone once you realize they've been emotionally abusing their spouse. Jessica started complaining to me that people were turning against her and believing lies. But honestly, these weren't lies. These were her own words coming back to haunt her. She'd spent years telling people how defective and inadequate Tom was, and now those same people were realizing that maybe Tom had good reasons for wanting to escape. The worst part for Jessica was when some of our extended family started distancing themselves from her. Our cousin Sarah, who'd always been close to Jessica, stopped returning her calls after she found out about the text messages. Our aunt and uncle, who'd initially offered to help with legal costs, quietly backed away once they understood what had really been going on. Even our parents started questioning Jessica's version of events. They didn't say anything directly to her, but they started asking me more questions about what I'd witnessed over the years. When I told them about the constant humiliation and cruel jokes Jessica had subjected Tom to, I could see them putting pieces together in their heads. Jessica's response to all this rejection was to get even more desperate and manic. She started calling people multiple times a day, demanding to know why they weren't supporting her. She'd show up at people's houses uninvited, trying to explain her side of the story. It was honestly scary to watch because she seemed completely unable to accept that her own actions had consequences. The isolation was clearly driving her crazy, but instead of doing any self-reflection, she just doubled down on blaming everyone else for not understanding her situation. She kept insisting that people were being manipulated by Tom and Maria, like they'd somehow brainwashed our entire family and friend circle. It was becoming really clear that Jessica was living in her own reality where she could do no wrong. Update 3. Living in her own reality was one thing, but Jessica's refusal to face facts started having some serious real-world consequences that she couldn't just ignore or blame on other people. The biggest hit was financial. Between her own legal fees and having to pay part of Tom and Maria's costs, Jessica was out probably close to $60,000. I mean, she made good money at her marketing job, but that's still a massive chunk of change for anyone. And you know what made it worse? She'd spent a fortune on that perfect house thinking it was going to be the backdrop for her perfect family life. She had to sell the house. The same house she'd thrown that disastrous housewarming party and the one she'd been so proud of just months earlier. Watching her pack up that place was honestly heartbreaking, even knowing everything she'd done. She kept muttering about how this was all temporary, how she'd get back on her feet and buy an even better house once people came to their senses. But the house sale was just the beginning. Jessica started drinking heavily, and I mean heavily. She'd call me at weird hours, clearly drunk, rambling about how everyone had betrayed her and how Tom and Maria were going to pay for what they did. Sometimes she'd cry, sometimes she'd rage, but she was always completely wasted. Our parents tried to stage an intervention, but Jessica turned on them too. She accused them of choosing Tom over their own daughter and said they were dead to her if they couldn't support her unconditionally. When my mom tried to suggest that maybe Jessica should consider therapy to work through some of these issues, Jessica screamed at her for taking the side of people who destroyed her life. That was when I finally went no contact with her. I couldn't take the 3 a.m. drunk calls anymore. The constant demands that I validate her version of reality, the way she'd lash out at anyone who tried to suggest she take even a tiny bit of responsibility for what happened. It was exhausting, and honestly kind of scary. Her work performance started suffering too. I heard through the grapevine that she'd had several public outbursts at the office, including one incident where she apparently screamed at a coworker who made an innocent comment about pregnancy. Her boss had to have multiple conversations with her about her behavior, and she was eventually put on some kind of performance improvement plan. The worst part was seeing how her bitterness was just consuming her completely. Every conversation became about how wronged she'd been, how unfair everything was, how people didn't understand what she was going through. She couldn't talk about anything else. It was like the Jessica I'd grown up with, the one who used to laugh and have fun and actually care about other people, had completely disappeared. She moved into this tiny apartment across town, and from what I heard from our parents, she was basically living like a hermit. No friends visiting, no social events, just her and her resentment and whatever bottle she was working through that week. It was painful to watch someone self-destruct so completely, but Jessica had made it clear that she didn't want help. She wanted everyone to agree that she was the victim, and that wasn't something any of us could do anymore. Update 4. While Jessica was spiraling into this pit of bitterness and isolation, something beautiful was happening on the other side of all this chaos. About 6 months after that awful housewarming party, Tom and Maria welcomed their baby boy. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if I should reach out when I heard the news. I mean, I'd supported Tom through everything, but I was still Jessica's brother, and I didn't want to make things awkward for them. But Tom actually called me himself to let me know about the birth, and he sounded like a completely different person. You have to understand, for the last few years of his marriage to Jessica, Tom had become this shell of himself. Quiet, apologetic, like he was constantly bracing for the next cruel comment or humiliation. But on that phone call, he was laughing and excited and just radiating happiness. He told me about holding his son for the first time, about how Maria was doing great, about how they'd named the baby David. He sounded like the Tom I remembered from years ago before Jessica had ground him down. A few weeks later, he invited me to visit them. They'd moved to this smaller city about 2 hours away to start fresh, which honestly was probably the smartest thing they could have done. Getting away from all the drama and gossip and just building their own life together. When I got to their house, this modest little place, nothing fancy but warm and comfortable, I almost didn't recognize Tom. He looked younger somehow, like years of stress had just melted off his face. He was smiling constantly, and not that forced, polite smile he used to do around Jessica. This was genuine happiness. And Maria. She was absolutely glowing. Not just in that new mom way, but like someone who was finally able to be herself without walking on eggshells. She made me feel so welcome, asking about my life, making sure I was comfortable. It struck me how different she was from Jessica. There was no performance, no need to impress or prove anything. She was just genuinely kind. The baby was perfect, obviously. Tiny and healthy and already showing signs of having Tom's eyes. But what really got to me was watching Tom with him. He was so gentle and natural, like he'd been waiting his whole life to be a dad. He kept talking about all the things he wanted to teach David, all the places he wanted to take him. It was the exact opposite of how Jessica used to talk about their future child. Less about how the baby would complete her perfect picture, and more about actually loving and raising a human being. Tom told me he'd been going to therapy to work through everything Jessica had put him through. He said it was helping him understand that none of it had been his fault, that he deserved to be treated with respect and kindness. Seeing him recognize his own worth after years of being told he was defective and inadequate was honestly one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed. They showed me around their neighborhood, introduced me to their neighbors, talked about their plans to maybe get a dog and plant a garden. Everything was so normal and healthy and real. No Instagram perfect staging, no performance for anyone else's benefit. Just two people who loved each other, building a quiet, authentic life together. Before I left, Tom pulled me aside and thanked me for supporting him through everything. He said he knew it couldn't have been easy since Jessica was my sister, but that my belief in him had meant everything during those dark months. I almost started crying right there because honestly I felt like I should have done more, should have spoken up sooner. But seeing them together, seeing Tom finally happy and at peace, seeing baby David surrounded by parents who actually wanted him for the right reasons, it felt like proof that sometimes good things really do come out of terrible situations. So that's where things stand now about a year later. The contrast between Jessica's life and Tom's couldn't be more stark, and honestly, it feels like the universe served up some serious karma. Jessica is living alone in that tiny apartment I mentioned, barely scraping by financially after all the legal costs and losing the house. From what our parents tell me, and they're pretty much the only ones who still talk to her, she's still drinking heavily and refusing to take any responsibility for what happened. She's convinced that Tom and Maria somehow orchestrated this whole thing to destroy her life, and she spends most of her time consumed by bitterness and resentment. She lost her job a few months ago after another public outburst, this time at a client meeting. Her boss finally had enough and let her go. She's working at some lower-level marketing position now, making probably half what she used to make. The perfect life she was so obsessed with building has completely crumbled, and it's all because she couldn't treat her husband with basic human decency. Meanwhile, Tom and Maria are absolutely thriving. I visited them again last month, and little David is crawling everywhere and babbling constantly. Tom looks healthier than I've seen him in years, and he and Maria are talking about maybe having another baby. They're not rich or living in some mansion, but they're genuinely happy in a way that Jessica never was, even when she had everything she thought she wanted. The family situation is pretty fractured now. Most of our relatives have cut Jessica off completely after seeing how she treated Tom and how she's handled the aftermath. Our parents still try to maintain some relationship with her, but even they've started setting boundaries because her behavior became so toxic. As for me, I'm still no contact with Jessica, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. I feel bad about it sometimes because she's my sister, but I can't enable her delusions anymore. Tom taught me something important about not accepting disrespect even from family. The whole situation has been a painful lesson in how cruelty and narcissism eventually catch up with you. Jessica's quest for the perfect life left her with a hollow, lonely existence, while Tom found real happiness by escaping her toxicity. Sometimes the good guys really do win in the end.